the WWE has been filled with many larger-than-life superstars. From The Rock to John Cena to Hulk Hogan, and then there was the ninth wonder of the world, Chyna. Chyna had all the ingredients along with a unique look that could have propelled her to the level of those superstars. However, the star had a short-lived run with the company at its peak, the Attitude Era. Her WWE career was riddled with absolute heartbreak and misfortunes backstage. She went off the deep end after discovering her then fiancé, Triple H, was having an affair with the boss's daughter. An impossible position for Chyna to be in both personally and professionally caused her to spiral. Heartbreak among relationships happens. Typically, people get their heart broken and it takes them maybe 6 months or a year to get back to normal. For Chyna, seemingly she never recovered as she turned to substance abuse, becoming addicted to alcohol, pills, and other hardcore drugs. Chyna went through many ups and downs in her career post-WWF, including a short stint in the acting world, followed by a brief stint as an adult performer. Her story is one of a meteoric rise, seemingly overnight, which includes battles of mental illness and eventually culminated in a sad, tragic ending. The superstar passed away at the age of 46 after suffering an accidental overdose from drugs and alcohol. This is a tale of one of the greatest and most impactful performers in WWE history. This is the tragic life and times of Chyna. Chyna was born Joan Lohr on December 27, 1969 in Rochester, New York. Her upbringing was said to be one of chaos, filled with constant change. She moved around a lot when she was younger as her parents divorced at a younger age. Her father struggled with alcoholism for most of his life, and Chyna never developed a good relationship with him. She stated she was assaulted by a middle school teacher while in 7th grade, and was also a victim of a sexual assault in college at the University of Tampa. She left home at 16 years old, finishing her last year of high school in Spain. She bounced around after college, eventually landing outside of Boston, Massachusetts. There she met wrestling legend Killer Kowalski and trained at his wrestling school. Details of how Chyna got into the wrestling business, specifically WWE, have been disputed by Kowalski. In her autobiography, titled If They Only Knew, Chyna claims she met Shawn Michaels and Triple H after a show in Boston. However, Kowalski claims he met with Shane McMahon to convince him to sign Chyna to the WWE. Triple H and Shawn Michaels have both claimed they met Chyna after a show in Boston, so that seems like the right story to me. The duo brought Chyna to meet with Vince. Apparently Vince was not sold on her at first sight. He did not like the idea of a woman of Chyna's stature being in the ring because no one would buy her facing the other women. Also, men would not want to step in the ring with her or get beat up by her. Triple H and Shawn Michaels wanted her to be their bodyguard, and after some pushing, they got their wish when Chyna was brought in for her WWF debut on February 16, 1997. WCW had voiced interest in her with an attempt to recruit her as the sole female member of the iconic NWO. Talk about a rags to riches story. Chyna went from unknown to being recruited to be in the two greatest factions of all time. It was a drastic change in lifestyle for Chyna. She immediately started at the top of the world, debuting as a member of DX, just as the Attitude Era was getting started. Things were going well for her as she began dating Triple H, and the two were in love, according to Chyna. The pair even got engaged during this time. Chyna was a barrier breaker and a pioneer of women's wrestling, more so than she ever gets credit for publicly by WWE. She became the first woman to enter the Royal Rumble match at the 1999 Royal Rumble, and later that year became the first and only woman to win the Intercontinental Championship when she defeated Jeff Jarrett at No Mercy. Jarrett held up Vince for an extra $300,000 to lose the title clean to a woman. Chyna regularly competed against men for most of her career, and then, as you can tell, problems were coming to be. Jarrett wasn't the only wrestler who was unhappy with working with or losing to Chyna. So was Chris Jericho. Jericho just went about it differently, keeping his frustrations within, and it paid off tremendously for him in the long run. One of Chyna's most memorable storylines was with Eddie Guerrero. It was here that Guerrero developed his Latino heat persona and showed how charismatic he could be. Honestly, Chyna helped Guerrero elevate into a star within the WWE, and he was very grateful for the time the two spent working together. Around this time, Chyna entered a feud with Ivory, and she won the WWF Women's title at WrestleMania 17. She defended the title once against Lita at Judgment Day 2001. This was her last match with the WWE. The details of her leaving WWE are very foggy, as there are multiple accounts of what actually happened. Famously, Jim Ross told his side of things from his perspective as the head of talent relations at the time, meaning he was in charge of negotiating a new contract with Chyna and consoling her as she was heartbroken from her recent breakup with Triple H. On an episode of his podcast, Grilling JR, Ross recalled that Chyna asked for a downside guarantee of $1 million, something Ross took exception to and called it unrealistic. Ross said that not even Austin and Triple H were making that kind of downside at the time. Wrestlers made most of their money through pay-per-view bonuses, merchandising, and media crossover. He speculated that Chyna made this demand because she was not serious in actually negotiating with WWE and wanted to pursue an acting and bodybuilding career. Chyna claimed that she met with Vince McMahon and was told essentially that family comes first, meaning that he had to look out for Stephanie. She claimed that she received a fax shortly thereafter while at a coffee shop or a restaurant. She said this during an interview, which left the people interviewing her shocked as to how WWE knew that she was at the restaurant at that time. Chyna's sister claimed that she was offered a brand new contract in 2001 with a $400,000 downside guarantee, but she turned it down because she felt she was worth more. Given her stature as a superstar at the time, she certainly would have made over $1 million annually throughout that contract. Many speculate that Chyna was too heartbroken and couldn't bear to see Triple H with another woman every day, while others speculate that she was pushed out of the WWE with Stephanie McMahon's and Triple H's best interest at heart. Given Vince's reputation of being business first, it is conceivable that he would have no problem with Chyna being employed by the company. It was an unfortunate situation given the way hers and Triple H's relationship ended, but it wasn't the end of the world. Given that Chyna's sister confirmed she was offered a contract, I tend to believe that this was the case. Jim Cornette has spoken about Chyna on his podcast, The Jim Cornette Experience, specifically during a review of the documentary, Vice Versa, Chyna. More on that in a moment. Cornette spoke about how Chyna perceived to see herself as just as big of a star as Stone Cold Steve Austin. He thought that was sad, and he went on to say how he felt bad for her because she only got into the wrestling business to be a star. And when you get into anything to be a star, it is tough to accept when you don't become a star. Not everyone becomes a star, and Chyna was an exception. She did become a star for a brief period and could not deal with it when she wasn't a star anymore. Simply put, she was not on the level of Stone Cold or even close to it in 2001. She could have gotten there, but unfortunately, she never did. Cornette put some of the blame on Vince Russo, who was an active supporter of Chyna throughout her WWE career and in life. Russo gassed up Chyna's head and made her think she was this huge star that could wrestle men, and even made her believe that she was Wonder Woman, according to Cornette. Vince Russo is certainly not entirely to blame for Chyna's downfall, and we know that Cornette has a bias against him. However, it is odd that even after Chyna isolated herself from just about everyone in the wrestling business, she kept in contact with Russo. Russo worked very close with Chyna during the Attitude Era, and was the one ultimately that pushed for Chyna to wrestle men, even though McMahon and company knew it was not a sustainable thing. Chyna's overvalue of herself, wanting to wrestle the likes of Stone Cold and The Rock, and her extremely high contract demands, coupled with her heartbreak from Triple H, are ultimately what contributed to her downfall. She had already struggled with some demons from her childhood I've mentioned already. The Vice documentary highlighted some more of her demons. They talked about how she wasn't accepted as a kid because she looked different than the other girls, and she just wanted to be accepted. She wanted to stand out, which led her to bodybuilding and eventually to wrestling, where she thought she could stand out. These childhood traumas mixed with a life of partying and rock and roll are never a good mix, and for Chyna, it led her down a rocky road post-WWE. She dated X-Pac for a while. X-Pac was also a noted drug user. The two had a very tumultuous and unhealthy relationship, as he put it in his own words. He went as far to say how Triple H warned him about dating Chyna prior to the two beginning their relationship. Chyna got arrested during this time for assault on Waltman. And eventually the couple released a porn video, which led to Chyna's venture into the adult film industry. Even though the two willingly released the video, Chyna later said during an interview shortly before her death that the video was released without her consent. After appearances on The Surreal Life and Celebrity Rehab, fans became worried about Chyna's well-being. She could often be seen incoherent and having intense arguments with X-Pac over the phone. She then created a YouTube channel and would sometimes post videos on it talking about her career in the WWE or other topics. Sometimes she'd be seen inebriated on camera. Things started to look up for her as she moved to Japan to escape the wild life of an American celebrity. There she became an English teacher and enjoyed a peaceful few years before she was pushed to move back to the States by her manager. Her manager, Anthony Anzaldo, insisted that she film a documentary, which turned into the one that Vice put out. The documentary was originally going to be called The Restoration of Chyna. Cornette and his co-host Brian Last both called Anzaldo sleazy and wished Chyna had been surrounded by better people in her life. Anzaldo recorded himself discovering Chyna's lifeless body after he somehow found his way into her apartment when he didn't hear from her for a few days. Then he kept some of her ashes and showed them off to the camera. From a viewer's perspective, it seems like this guy would stop at nothing to be on TV and have his 15 minutes of fame, at the expense of someone's life. Eric Angra, the director of the film, was allegedly doing drugs with her and enabling her problem. Yeah, Chyna is to blame for not getting help for her personal struggles and ultimately turning down the dangerous paths that she took. However, these guys and many others were just a part of the problem. Mental illness is serious and not something that should be taken lightly. In one of her later interviews, she accused Triple H of physically assaulting her. Now, I have no idea if this is true or not. Such a claim would need a criminal case at minimum before I could even think about discussing it further. Chyna likely inherited these mental issues from her parents throughout her formidable years. She grew up around an alcoholic father and an absentee mother who brought several stepdads into her house. Sadly, Chyna was taken from us far too soon after she passed away on April 20th, 2016 from a combination of a drug and alcohol overdose. She was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2019 as a member of D-Generation X. She has not been inducted as a solo star, despite her trailblazing career featuring many accolades. Some speculate this is because of her involvement with Triple H and Stephanie McMahon 20-something years ago. If that is the case, it's a shame that WWE can't put aside the fact that Triple H dated her 2 decades ago to properly honor her legacy. I don't know why she isn't in the Hall of Fame. What I do know is that she deserves it for everything she meant to the wrestling business, a business that she gave her body and soul to. This has been another edition of Wrestling Uncovered. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll talk to you on the next one.